Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We love to get into the nitty-gritty of these topics that really matter, and today we're tackling something I know is on a lot of your minds. Men's rights, covert contracts and relationships, that whole dynamic, and how society's expectations of men, well, they've really shifted over time. And to help us unpack all of this, we're going deep into Redacted Book Title by Conrad Riker.
Conrad Riker. Now, there's a guy who isn't afraid to shake things up. His work really digs into the history of, all these institutions that we take for granted and how they've been, reshaped by different forces over time. It's really fascinating stuff, especially if you're trying to understand the whole, dance of power and gender throughout history.
Okay, so right off the bat, Riker throws down a pretty big challenge to what a lot of people think about gender equality. He's saying that men and women aren't just, social constructs, but they're fundamentally different.
Yeah.
Like down to their biology. And he's saying these inherent differences are what have shaped our societies and our institutions.
Yeah, he's not pulling any punches, is he? He goes right to the heart of it. Riker argues that men, for example, they're biologically predisposed to risk-taking, which, back in the day, made them better suited for roles like soldiers or explorers. And this inherent difference, he says, explains why men still dominate in certain fields like construction and finance, even in today's world.
So he's basically saying these differences aren't just something we've made up. They're actually hardwired into us.
Yeah.
How does he connect that to this idea of covert contracts and relationships, though?
Well, Riker suggests that these biological differences, they've really shaped the traditional roles that men and women play in relationships and in families. That covert contract you mentioned, where men typically provide and protect and women nurture and care for the home. Well, he says that emerged from these inherent differences. It's not just some arbitrary thing somebody made up.
Sounds like he's saying these contracts weren't just imposed by men. They were a natural outcome of how we're wired as men and women.
Exactly. And he goes on to argue that trying to erase these differences or deny their significance, it can actually lead to a whole bunch of problems. The feminist movement, while it aimed for equality, it often ignored these fundamental differences. And that's led to a disruption of those traditional contracts and a lot of the tension we see in modern relationships.
So is he saying men and women have different strengths and weaknesses, and trying to force them into the same mold is just creating more problems?
That's the gist of it. And he argues that this push for equality, it often leads to situations where men are actually disadvantaged. He points to policies like affirmative action and gender quotas, which prioritize outcomes over merit and potentially harm men's opportunities in the process.
It's almost like the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction, and now men are being penalized for their traditional strengths.
He argues that this focus on equality of outcome instead of equality of opportunity, it can backfire. It creates new forms of discrimination. For example, in fields where men have traditionally excelled, like engineering or construction, Riker suggests that pushing for equal representation could lead to a decline in quality or efficiency.
I could see how that would connect with the concerns of a lot of men's rights activists who feel like the system is rigged against them.
Oh, absolutely. Riker's work really resonates with people who feel like they're being unfairly disadvantaged. And he doesn't shy away from discussing the impact of these societal shifts on men's mental health and well-being.
Let's talk about that. How does he see these changes impacting men's mental health?
Well, Riker argues that this constant portrayal of men as oppressors and the demonization of traditional masculinity, it's led to a rise in anxiety and depression among men. The rates of suicide among men are alarming, and he sees that as evidence of this crisis.
It's almost like men are being told that just being a man is a problem, and that message is taking a toll on their mental health.
It's a double bind, Men are told they need to be strong and stoic, but also sensitive and emotionally available. And that creates a paradox that's incredibly difficult to navigate. A lot of men end up feeling lost and unsure of who they're supposed to be.
It's like they're being told to be John Wayne and Mr. Rogers at the same time.
Yeah.
No wonder so many guys are struggling.
And he connects this double bind to the erosion of traditional male roles and institutions. The decline of fatherhood, for example, has deprived men of a sense of purpose and belonging. It's a huge loss.
That makes sense. If men are told their traditional roles aren't valued anymore, of course they're going to feel lost and uncertain.
And this crisis of masculinity, it's further fueled by the influence of feminist narrative. In the education system, in the media, and the workplace, Riker argues that men are constantly bombarded with messages that they're privileged, toxic, responsible for all the world's problems. It's relentless.
Like they're the villains of the story no matter what they do.
And that constant negativity has a profound impact on men's self-esteem, their sense of purpose. It's tough to deal with.
So what's the way out of this mess? What does Riker suggest we do to address this crisis of masculinity and find some balance in the whole gender dynamic?
He doesn't advocate for a rejection of traditional masculinity. He actually wants us to reevaluate it. He thinks there are valuable aspects of those traditional male roles and behaviors that we've demonized unfairly.
So, not going back to the past, but finding a way to bring those positive aspects of masculinity into the modern world.
Exactly. He encourages men to reclaim their strength, their assertiveness, their leadership potential, but to do it in a way that's responsible, respectful, and aligned with their values. Being a good man in the 21st century, strong and capable, but also compassionate and empathetic.
Now, that sounds like a goal worth striving for.
And he emphasizes the importance of men supporting each other, creating communities where they can share experiences, learn from each other, build a sense of brotherhood, lifting each other up.
That sounds a lot like the kind of community you find in the Red Pill movement.
Yeah.
Men coming together to support each other and challenge those dominant narratives about gender and relationships.
There are definitely some parallels there. Riker's work, like the Red Pill philosophy, encourages men to be critical of the messages they're getting from society and to find their own path to masculinity, what works for them.
Which brings us back to those covert contracts. How does Riker suggest men navigate those unspoken agreements in their relationships? Especially now when traditional gender roles are being challenged left and right.
He says the first step is awareness. You have to become aware of these contracts, to understand those underlying expectations that are often unspoken, but so deeply ingrained. They're there even if we don't talk about them.
So it's about being more conscious of what's going on in your relationship, understanding how those expectations are shaping how you interact with each other.
Exactly. And once you're aware of these contracts, you can start to have honest conversations with your partner about what you both want and need from the relationship.
It's about open communication, being honest about your expectations and desires, not letting those assumptions just fester and create problems down the line.
Right. And he encourages men to be assertive in those conversations, to be clear about their needs and boundaries, and to not be afraid to negotiate a new contract that works for both partners.
So it's not about men being the boss or dictating the term. It's about finding a way to create a partnership that benefits both people and makes them both feel fulfilled.
Exactly. Relationships are a two-way street. Both partners need to feel heard, respected, and valued.
This is already giving me a lot to think about in my own relationships. How I can be more conscious of these covert contracts. Fascinating.
What's really interesting is that Riker also connects these personal dynamics to the larger societal forces that have shaped how we understand gender and power. He argues that feminist narratives, while well-intentioned, have often distorted history and created a very negative perception of men.
Okay, let's dive into that. How does he see these feminist narratives impacting our understanding of history?
Well, he challenges that feminist narrative that often portrays men as the villains of history and women as perpetual victims. He thinks it's a simplistic view that ignores the complexities of the past and the contributions that both men and women have made to society, It's not that black and white.
But we need to be more nuanced in our understanding of history, recognizing that it's not just a story of oppressors and the oppressed.
Exactly. He gives examples from history where men have fought for social justice, supported women's rights, made significant contributions to the arts, sciences, and culture. Men have done a lot of good, too.
It's not about denying that there have been injustices in the past, but recognizing that men have also played a positive role in shaping the world.
Right. And he thinks this more balanced view of history is essential for understanding how complex gender relations are today.
Yeah.
That feminist narrative that focuses on male oppression, it's created a lot of resentment and distrust, and that undermines healthy relationships between men and women.
It makes you think about the stories we tell ourselves about the past and how those stories can really warp our perceptions of the present.
He argues that this rewriting of history has a direct impact on how we view masculinity today. By portraying men as the villains of the past, the feminist narrative creates a sense of guilt and shame that can be crippling for men who are just trying to figure out their own identity in the modern world.
It's like they're told they're inherently bad or flawed just because they're men. That's a lot to carry around.
And this shame can lead men to reject their own masculinity, to suppress their natural instincts, to apologize for just existing. It's heartbreaking.
This is starting to sound a lot like the concept of toxic masculinity, where certain aspects of traditional male behavior are demonized as harmful or oppressive.
He thinks the concept of toxic masculinity, while sometimes well-intentioned, has often been used as a weapon to shame men and undermine their confidence. A lot of the qualities that are traditionally associated with masculinity, strength, assertiveness, competitiveness, they're not inherently bad. They can be channeled in positive and constructive ways.
So it's not about getting rid of those qualities. It's about finding a healthy and balanced way to express them.
Exactly. He argues that men need to be encouraged to embrace their masculinity, not suppress it, and to find ways to express their strength and their drive in ways that benefit them and society as a whole.
That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
It's about taking back the power of masculinity and using it as a force for good.
And he ties it back to the idea of leadership. Riker argues that this demonization of masculinity by the feminist narrative has led to a decline in male leadership, which he thinks is essential for a stable and thriving society.
So he's saying that we need strong male leaders, not in spite of their masculinity, but because of it.
Exactly. He argues that men and women have different leadership styles, each with their own strength and weakness, and a healthy society needs a balance of both. This current trend of pushing men out of leadership positions, he thinks it's ultimately harmful.
It's interesting. It's not about saying that women can't be good leaders. It's about recognizing that men bring something unique to the table, too.
Right. He uses examples like Winston Churchill's leadership during World War II. His decisiveness and resilience under pressure qualities he associates with traditional masculinity were crucial to the Allied victory. And he also points to figures like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Their leadership styles, while not perfect, were shaped by their masculine qualities and helped to shape the course of history.
It makes you think about the whole debate about gender roles and leadership positions. It's like he's saying we shouldn't be trying to force everyone into the same mold, but recognizing that different people bring different strengths to the table.
Exactly. He argues that a diversity of leadership styles is essential for a healthy and functioning society.
Wow. This is a lot to take in. It seems like Riker is really challenging a lot of the conventional wisdom about gender equality and the role of men in society.
He is. And his work is especially relevant for people who are questioning those dominant narratives and looking for a deeper understanding of the dynamics at play in their relationships and in the world at large.
I can already see how this book could be incredibly valuable for anyone interested in men's rights, the red pill philosophy, or just understanding the history of gender roles and expectations.
Absolutely. Riker's work is like a powerful antidote to the often one-sided narratives that dominate the mainstream media and academia.
This is just the tip of the iceberg, though. We've only scratched the surface of Riker's ideas. There's so much more to explore in this book.
There is. We'll dive deeper into his analysis of the feminist aesthetic, the rewriting of history, and the impact of these narratives on men's lives in the next part of our deep dive.
This has been incredibly insightful so far. I'm already looking forward to part 2.
So, we were talking about how Riker challenges these narratives around gender, and he also delves into how these narratives have impacted our very idea of beauty, particularly, in the realm of cosmetics and the beauty industry. It's fascinating how he ties it all together.
Okay, so we're talking makeup, skincare, that whole world of beauty standard. How does he connect that to everything else we've been discussing?
Well, Riker argues that the feminist movement, while initially critiquing those traditional beauty standards, the ones that were seen as oppressive, it actually ended up creating its own set of restrictive expectations. He calls it the feminist aesthetic, and he suggests that it can be just as harmful as the standards it claims to oppose.
So basically he's saying feminism just replaced one set of beauty standards with another. Could you give us an example of what he means?
Sure. He points to the whole natural beauty movement. Now, on the surface, it's great for women to feel comfortable in their own skin. But Riker argues that the pressure to reject all forms of artificial enhancement, like makeup or cosmetic surgery, it can be just as intense as the pressure to conform to those old ideals. It's like a pendulum swing, from one extreme to the other.
So now women are being judged for whether or not they wear makeup. It's like a whole new set of pressures and expectations. It's fascinating how these things evolve.
Exactly. And it's not just about makeup either. Riker argues that the feminist aesthetic often promotes a kind of androgynous look, minimal makeup functional clothing, a rejection of anything that's seen as traditionally feminine. Think about the rise of athleisure and that whole comfort over style trend. Riker sees this as a reflection of that aesthetic. It's seeped into our culture in a big way.
That's interesting. I can definitely see how that connects to his idea that feminism is trying to erase the differences between men and women. It's like a blurring of the lines between what's considered masculine and feminine.
Exactly. And he goes even further. He argues that this aesthetic isn't just about personal style. It's actually infiltrated our institutions. He suggests that it's used to justify policies that disadvantage men in the workplace, like diversity quotas or mandatory sensitivity training. It's like a subtle form of discrimination.
So men are being judged for not conforming to this new aesthetic, even in professional settings. It's like a whole new set of rules that they have to navigate.
Precisely. He argues that men are often penalized for being assertive, competitive, or expressing traditional masculine traits, while women are often rewarded for adopting a more androgynous or even masculine style. It's a double standard that he finds troubling.
That's pretty thought-provoking. Makes you wonder if these attempts to erase gender differences are actually creating more problems than they solve. It's like we're trying to fit everyone into the same box, and that can't possibly work for everyone.
And he ties this back to the idea of societal stability. Riker believes that these trends are contributing to a decline in cultural norms and a sense of community. It's like the glue that holds society together is starting to come undone.
So it's not just about individual men and women feeling lost or confused. It's about the very fabric of society itself starting to unravel. It's a pretty big picture perspective.
That's exactly how he sees it. He argues that the push for political correctness and the rejection of traditional values have created a sense of fragmentation, a loss of shared identity. We're all becoming more isolated and disconnected from each other.
That's a pretty bleak outlook. But I can see how it connects to some of the anxieties that people are feeling today. There's a sense that things are changing too fast and that we're losing something important in the process.
Riker believes that we need to find a sense of balance. He argues that a healthy society needs both masculine and feminine energy, both traditional values and progressive ideas. It's not an either-or situation. It's about finding a way to integrate both.
So it's not about going back to the past, but about finding a way to bring those positive aspects of the past into the present and blending them with the best of what the modern world has to offer.
Exactly. He encourages people to be critical of the dominant narratives, to think for themselves and to find their own path, one that honors their values and their individuality. It's about taking ownership of your own life and not letting yourself be defined by someone else's agenda.
This is making me think a lot about those covert contracts we were talking about in relationships. It's like those unspoken expectations about gender roles are being challenged and reshaped by these larger societal trends. And that can create a lot of confusion and conflict, especially for couples who are trying to navigate those changes together.
Absolutely. And that's why Riker stresses the importance of open and honest communication. He encourages couples to have those sometimes difficult conversations about their expectations and to find a way to negotiate a new contract that works for both partners, one that takes into account the realities of the modern world.
So it's about being upfront with each other, about what you want and need from the relationship, not letting those unspoken assumptions fester and create resentment. It's about being proactive and intentional, about creating a partnership that works for both people.
Precisely. It's about acknowledging the challenges of navigating these changing dynamics, but also recognizing the opportunity to create something new and fulfilling together. It's about embracing the complexity and finding a way to make it work.
This has been really eye-opening so far. I'm starting to see how these seemingly abstract ideas about feminism, masculinity, and societal trends, they actually have a very real impact on our everyday lives and relationships. All these pieces are starting to fit together.
That's the power of Riker's work. He helps us to connect the dots and see the bigger picture. And he doesn't shy away from controversy. He really challenges some of the core tenets of feminism and the woke ideology that's become so prevalent in our culture.
And that's what makes his work so valuable, especially for people who feel like their perspectives are being silenced or marginalized. It's like a breath of fresh air to hear someone articulate these ideas in such a clear and compelling way.
I'm glad you're finding it valuable. I know I've learned a lot from reading his work, and I think it's something that can really benefit anyone who's trying to make sense of the world we live in.
I'm already thinking about how I can apply some of these ideas to my own life and relationships, like a whole new framework for understanding these complex issues.
That's fantastic. Riker's book provides a really valuable framework for understanding these issues, and it empowers individuals to take control of their own narrative. It's about taking back your power and shaping your own destiny.
And there's still so much more to unpack. We haven't even touched on his analysis of the connection between feminism and Marxism, or his critique of the witchy aesthetics that have become so popular in certain circles. It's like a whole other layer of the onion that we need to peel back.
We'll get to those topics in the next part of our deep dive. There's a lot to uncover, and it's all incredibly relevant to anyone who's trying to understand the cultural and political landscape we're navigating today. It's like a roadmap for making sense of the chaos.
Can't wait to dive in. Let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and explore those final layers of Riker's fascinating and thought-provoking work. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into redacted book title. We've covered so much ground already, from those covert contracts and the feminist aesthetic to the rewriting of history and that whole crisis of masculinity. It's been a wild ride.
Now we're getting to some of Riker's most thought-provoking arguments, about the connection between feminism and Marxism, and his critique of what he calls those witchy aesthetics. This is where things get really interesting.
These are some heavy topics. I'm curious to hear how he connects feminism to Marxism. That seems like a big jump to me.
It might seem that way at first, but Riker argues that there's a deeper ideological connection between those two movements. He suggests that both feminism and Marxism, they share this common goal of dismantling those traditional power structures.
Yeah.
And creating, a more egalitarian society. It's not just about equality on the surface. It goes deeper than that.
So it's not just about gender equality for feminists and economic equality for Marxists.
Yeah.
He's saying there's something more fundamental linking them together.
Exactly. He traces this connection back to the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Those guys.
Yeah.
They saw the traditional family structure as a tool of capitalist oppression. They believed that it was designed to keep women subservient to men and to maintain the power of that ruling class. The family was just another cog in the machine.
So the family was just another way for the powerful to exploit the powerless. Yeah. That's a pretty radical idea.
It is. And Riker argues that a lot of feminist theorists have adopted and adapted these ideas, particularly those concepts of patriarchy and false consciousness. Those terms get thrown around a lot. but he gives them a very specific meaning.
Okay, let's break those down. What does he mean by those terms?
Well, patriarchy, as Riker defines it, it refers to that whole system of male dominance that he sees as permeating society and false consciousness. Well, that refers to the way that individuals are basically indoctrinated into accepting their own oppression. They come to believe that the system is fair and just, even when it's actually working against their own interests.
So it's like a form of brainwashing. Okay. Where people are convinced that the system is working for them when it's actually exploiting them.
That's the idea. And Riker suggests that feminist theorists, well, they use these concepts to explain why women have historically accepted those subservient roles. Yeah. They argue that women have been tricked into believing that they're inferior to men, that they don't have the same capabilities or rights.
So it's not about women making choices. It's about them being victims of a system that's rigged against them. That's a pretty bleak outlook.
It is. And Riker believes that this victim mentality can be incredibly disempowering. He argues that it prevents women from taking responsibility for their own lives and making choices that could lead to true fulfillment. It keeps them stuck in this cycle of blame and resentment.
It's like he's saying that true empowerment comes from recognizing your own agency, not from blaming external forces for all your problems. You have to take control of your own life.
Exactly. And he suggests that this focus on victimhood has also led to a demonization of men, portraying them as the enemy rather than as potential allies in the pursuit of equality. It creates this division that makes it impossible to find common ground.
Makes sense. If you see men as the oppressors, it's going to be pretty hard to work with them to create a better world. It's like you've already written them off as the bad guys.
Right. And this ties into his critique of those witchy aesthetics that have become so popular in some feminist circles, the embrace of witchcraft, goddess worship, those kinds of occult. Riker argues that this reflects a deeper rejection of traditional values and a desire to overturn the existing power structure. It's a way of rebelling against the patriarchy.
Okay, so he's not just talking about women wearing crystals or casting spells. He's saying there's a deeper ideological significance to this trend.
Exactly. He sees it as a way for some feminists to reclaim power and to express their anger and frustration with men and with those traditional institutions. It's a way of saying, we're not going to play by your rules anymore. We're going to create our own power structure.
So it's like a form of rebellion, a way of rejecting the old ways and embracing something new and different.
And he argues that this trend is dangerous because it encourages a rejection of rationality and logic, replacing it with a more emotional and often irrational approach to social issues. It's like we're throwing out the Enlightenment and going back to the Dark Ages.
It's like he's saying that this embrace of the occult is undermining critical thinking and leading to a more polarized and divisive society, where people are more interested in feeling righteous than in actually solving problems.
And he also connects this trend to the rise of identity politics, suggesting that it's become a way for some feminists to reinforce that narrative of victimhood and to justify their anger and resentment towards men. It's all about who's been wronged and who owes who an apology.
It's like they're using these practices to create a sense of us versus them, rather than trying to find common ground and build bridges of understanding. It's like they've given up on dialogue and just want to fight.
Right, and Riker encourages readers to be critical of this trend and to recognize that true empowerment. Well, it comes from within, not from aligning yourself with a particular ideology or group identity. It's about finding your own strength, your own voice.
It's about finding your own path, your own truth, and not being afraid to challenge the status quo, even if it means going against the grain of popular opinion.
Exactly. And that brings us to Riker's ultimate message, which is a call for balance and integration. He believes that a healthy society, it needs both masculine and feminine energies, both traditional values and those progressive ideas. It's not about one side winning over the other.
So it's not about men versus women or tradition versus progress. It's about finding a way to synthesize the best aspects of both, to create a world that works for everyone.
Exactly. He encourages readers to embrace their individuality, to challenge those dominant narratives, and to create a world that's more just, more compassionate, more fulfilling for everyone. It's a hopeful message, but it's also a challenging one.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking conversation. Riker's book really challenges us to think critically about the world around us and to question those assumptions that we often take for granted. It's not always comfortable, but it's always engaging.
And if you're ready to dive deeper into these ideas and explore Riker's work for yourself, you can find Redacted Book Title on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. I'm sure it's done the same for you. Remember, true empowerment comes from understanding all sides of the story. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep shaping your own narrative. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.